July 28, 1944. A sea of mud and misery outside the skeletal remains of St. Lo, France. For 2 weeks, the city had been a charnel house, pulverized into gray dust by Allied bombers and German 88s. Now, a steady, miserable drizzle falls from a sky the color of lead, turning the Norman soil into a thick, grasping paste. It clings to boots, to ambulance tires, to the green canvas of the 44th Evacuation Hospital's tents. The air is thick with the metallic tang of blood, the sharp chemical bite of disinfectant, and the low, constant hum of human suffering. Inside the surgical tent, Captain Daniel Hayes of the U.S. Army Medical Corps hasn't slept in 36 hours. His spectacles are smudged, his olive-drab scrubs are stained with blood that is not his own, and his hands, though steady, ache with a deep, persistent fatigue. All day, the ambulances have been rolling in from the front lines of Operation Cobra, the great American breakout. They bring the cost of that breakout in shattered limbs, perforated chests, and vacant 1,000-yard stares. Hayes, a general surgeon from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, moves from one canvas cot to the next, a man fighting a losing battle against the tide of war's butchery. He clamps an artery, sutures a gaping wound, murmurs a word of hollow comfort, and moves on. The faces blur into a single portrait of American youth, torn and broken. A sudden commotion from outside the tent cuts through his concentration. It's not the familiar rumble of a jeep or the urgent cry of a medic, but a different sound, shouting in German, sharp and panicked, followed by the authoritative bark of an American MP. Hayes straightens his back, feeling a vertebrae pop, and glances toward the tent flap. He has no time for distractions, especially not from the prisoner enclosure set up 100 yards away. They have their own medics, German doctors captured alongside their men. Let them handle it. But the shouting grows louder. The tent flap is thrown back, and a drenched corporal from the military police leans in, his face flushed. "Captain Hayes, sir, we might need you over at the POW pen." Sergeant Miller, Hayes' head surgical technician, looks up from a tray of sterilized instruments. "We've got a belly wound waiting, Captain. Corporal from the 2nd Armored." "What is it, Corporal?" Hayes asks the MP, his voice flat with exhaustion. "A woman, sir. One of the German auxiliaries we picked up near Marini. She collapsed. The others are saying she can't walk. We think she might be faking it to get out of the rain, but protocol says we gotta have an officer check her out before we get rough." Hayes sighs, a long, weary exhalation. Malingering, a common complaint. Prisoners feigning illness or injury to get better food, a dry cot, a moment's respite. He grabs a worn stethoscope, drapes it around his neck, and follows the MP out into the rain. The mud sucks at his boots with a greedy sound. The POW enclosure is a simple affair, a perimeter of concertina wire surrounding a collection of shivering, hollow-eyed German soldiers in their field gray wool uniforms, now dark and heavy with rain. In the center of the miserable crowd, 2 older women are holding up a younger one, a girl of perhaps 19 or 20. Her face is pale as bone china, her blonde hair plastered to her skull. She isn't wounded. There's no blood, no torn uniform, no obvious sign of trauma. As Hayes approaches, the prisoners part, their expressions a mixture of fear, hostility, and morbid curiosity. The young woman's eyes, a startling blue, lock onto Hayes. They are wide, not with pain, but with a pure, undiluted terror that seems wholly out of place. One of the older women, seeing the medical insignia on Hayes' helmet, begins speaking in rapid, desperate German. The MP holds up a hand. "Easy, Helga. We got a translator coming." A young private, a kid from Milwaukee named Fisher, who learned German from his grandparents, is hustled forward. He listens for a moment, then turns to Hayes. "Sir, they say her name is Clara. She says her legs won't work. Woke up this morning, they felt like pins and needles. An hour ago, she tried to stand up and just couldn't." Hayes kneels in the mud, ignoring the cold water seeping into the knee of his trousers. "Ask her where it hurts." Fisher relays the question. The girl, Clara, shakes her head, her eyes still fixed on Hayes. She whispers a reply. She says, "It doesn't hurt, sir," Fisher translates. She says, "It feels like nothing, like they're not there." This reinforces Hayes' suspicion. No pain, just an inability to move. It sounds like a textbook case of hysteria, or a performance worthy of a stage play. He runs his hands firmly down her legs, feeling for a break, a sprain, a sign of swelling. Nothing. The muscles feel soft, but not atrophied. He presses his thumb hard into her calf muscle, a move that should elicit a wince from even the most stoic soldier. She doesn't even blink. He looks up at her face, ready to deliver a stern verdict, to tell the MP to haul her to her feet and send her on her way. But he stops. The terror in her eyes hasn't wavered. It's not the look of someone trying to pull a fast one. It's the look of a person trapped inside their own body, a prisoner within a prison. Something is profoundly wrong here. On instinct, he pulls a small percussion hammer from his medical bag and taps her knee, just below the patella. It doesn't move. It just hangs there, limp and lifeless, like a puppet's limb with its strings cut. He taps again, harder. Nothing. A cold knot of dread begins to form in his stomach, a feeling entirely separate from the weariness of the battlefield. This is not hysteria. This is not an act. "Get her inside," Hayes says, his voice suddenly sharp. "Now." Sergeant Miller protests immediately as two MPs carry the limp German woman into the already overflowing surgical tent. "Captain, where are you going to put her? We've got GIs on the floor. That cot is for Corporal Davies." Hayes doesn't hesitate. "Davies is stable. Put him on a stretcher for now. Clear that cot." The order is met with a grim silence, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Why is an enemy auxiliary taking precedence over an American soldier? Hayes ignores the glares. He is no longer an American officer dealing with a German prisoner. He is a doctor, and he is facing a medical mystery that is rapidly turning terrifying. They lay Clara on the cot. The fabric of her uniform is soaked through, and she begins to shiver violently. Hayes orders a nurse to cut away the wet clothes and cover her with dry blankets. In the harsh glare of the single bare bulb swinging from the tent's central pole, her skin looks translucent, her form fragile. The tent is a symphony of hellish sounds. The wet, ragged cough of a soldier with a lung wound, the high-pitched whine of a bone saw from a partitioned-off corner, the low, steady murmur of a chaplain administering last rites. Through it all, Clara lies perfectly still, her blue eyes darting around the tent, taking in the macabre theater of it all. Hayes begins his examination in earnest. He needs to know how far this has spread, and how fast. "Fisher," he calls to the young translator, "stay right here. I need you to translate for me, exactly." He starts with her feet, running the pointed end of a closed safety pin along the soles. A normal response would be for the toes to curl downwards. Hers do nothing. He moves up to her ankles, her shins, her knees, testing for any sensation. He asks, and she whispers her reply, translated by Fisher. "Nothing. I feel nothing." He tests her reflexes again, methodically. Patellar, Achilles, plantar, all absent. The signals from her brain are being sent, but they are not arriving. Something is interrupting the connection, severing the link between will and muscle. Her legs are no longer a part of her. They are just dead weight, alien appendages attached to her torso. And the paralysis is symmetrical, affecting both legs equally. That rules out many types of localized nerve damage or stroke. This is something systemic, something attacking her entire nervous system from within. His mind scrolls through the pages of textbooks he hadn't opened since medical school in Philadelphia. Polio? It could be, but the onset was usually more gradual, often accompanied by fever and a stiff neck. A spinal cord tumor or injury? Unlikely, given the lack of pain or any history of trauma. He keeps coming back to a rare, obscure diagnosis, something he'd only read about, acute idiopathic polyneuritis, a mouthful of a name for a terrifying condition, later to be known as Guillain-Barré syndrome, a post-viral autoimmune response where the body's own immune system, confused after fighting off an infection, begins to attack the myelin sheath that insulates the peripheral nerves. The nerves, stripped of their protection, short-circuit. The result is a rapidly ascending paralysis. Fisher, ask her if she's been sick recently. A cold, a cough, a stomach flu, anything at all in the last few weeks. The private relays the question. Clara hesitates, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then she nods, whispering a few words. She says yes, Fisher reports. About 10 days ago, she had a bad sore throat, a fever. It lasted 2 or 3 days and then went away. The final piece of the puzzle clicks into place for Hayes. The preceding infection is the classic trigger. He feels a cold certainty wash over him. His diagnosis is correct. But the certainty brings no comfort, only a deeper, more profound dread. In 1944, there is no treatment for Guillain-Barré. No steroids, no plasmapheresis, no intravenous immunoglobulins. There is nothing to be done but wait and hope the body's assault on itself ceases before it's too late. And the paralysis is still ascending. It had started in her feet this morning. It was at her knees when he first saw her. Now, a quick check confirms his fears. It has reached her hips. She cannot lift her legs an inch, even with all her effort. He watches the rhythmic rise and fall of the thin wool blanket covering her chest. The intercostal muscles between the ribs, the diaphragm below the lungs, they are all controlled by the same peripheral nerves. The paralysis is climbing, relentlessly, towards the muscles that allow her to breathe. "Clara," he says, looking her directly in the eye, foregoing the translator for a moment. He places his hand on her chest. "Take a deep breath, a big one." She tries. Her eyes widen in panic as she gasps, her chest barely rising. The breath is shallow, hitched, a desperate little gulp of air. The unseen enemy was no longer just in her legs. It was wrapping its tendrils around her lungs. Hayes feels his own heart hammer against his ribs. This was no longer about saving her from a wheelchair. He was in a race against total paralysis, a race against suffocation. And looking at the shallow, frantic movement of her chest, he knew, with chilling certainty, that it was a race he was about to lose. "Get me a respiratory count, now!" Hayes's voice cuts through the din of the tent, sharp with an urgency that makes Sergeant Miller and a nearby nurse jump. "I want you to count her breaths per minute. Call it out to me every 5 minutes without fail." A young corpsman, barely out of his teens, scrambles to the side of the cot, his eyes fixed on the almost imperceptible rise and fall of the blanket over Clara's chest, his watch in hand. The number he calls out is terrifyingly high and shallow, 32 breaths per minute. She was working too hard for too little air. Clara's panic is escalating. Her eyes, wide and pleading, are locked on Hayes. She begins to whisper frantically in German, a stream of fearful questions that Fisher struggles to keep up with. She's asking what's happening. She says she can't get enough air. She's asking if she is dying. For a moment, Captain Dan Hayes, the detached professional, vanishes. He is just a man, faced with a terrified young woman he is powerless to help in any conventional way. He pulls a stool to the side of the cot and takes her hand. It feels cold, clammy. He looks at her, trying to project a calm he is far from feeling. "Fisher, tell her this," he says, his voice low and steady. "Tell her that her body is fighting an illness. Tell her that it has made her muscles weak, even the muscles for breathing. Tell her that I am not going to leave her side and that we are going to help her." As Fisher translates the gentle lie, a lie of omission, for there was little real help he could offer, Clara's trembling fingers tighten around a small dog-eared photograph she has pulled from a pocket inside her tunic. She holds it up for Hayes to see. It's a cheap, black-and-white portrait of a small, smiling boy with light hair, perhaps 4 or 5 years old. "Lucas," she whispers, the name a fragile puff of air. "Mein Sohn, my son." The word transforms her from an anonymous German auxiliary into a mother, desperate to live for her child. A lump forms in Hayes's throat. The corpsman calls out the new count. 36, sir, and they're getting shallower." The oxygen starvation was beginning. A subtle bluish tint was appearing around her lips. Hayes knows what he needs, an iron lung, the massive, coffin-like machine that could breathe for a patient. It was a staple of polio wards back home, but here, in a canvas tent surrounded by the carnage of Normandy, such a thing was a science fiction fantasy. He had to keep her alive with nothing but his hands, his wits, and the meager supplies of a forward medical unit. The tent flap swings open again. This time it's Major Davies, the hospital's commanding officer, a career army man whose face is a permanent mask of grim impatience. Hayes, what in God's name is going on here? I've got a line of GIs waiting for triage, and you, my best surgeon, are holding hands with a Kraut POW. Sergeant Miller tells me you bumped a wounded tanker for her. Hayes stands up, his posture stiffening. Major, this woman is in acute respiratory distress. I believe she has acute idiopathic polyneuritis. Her diaphragm is becoming paralyzed. She's going to stop breathing within the hour if we don't intervene. Davies stares at him blankly. What? Is it contagious? No, sir. It's an autoimmune response. So it's not going to spread to our men? Good, Davies says, his tone dismissive. Then what's the issue? She's a prisoner of war. We are not equipped to provide long-term palliative care. Our mission is to patch up our boys and get them back in the fight or get them to a real hospital in England. Your time is being wasted. The words hang in the air, a stark reminder of the brutal calculus of war. A GI with a survivable wound who could be returned to duty was worth more than an enemy non-combatant with a rare, fatal disease. It was an equation Hayes understood, but could not accept. Sir, with all due respect, Hayes says, his voice tight, my oath as a physician was not limited by nationality. This patient is suffocating in front of my eyes. I have a duty to act. Before the major can respond, the corpsman by the bed lets out a strangled cry. Captain, her breathing, it's stopped. I can't see her chest moving at all. Hayes spins around. Clara's eyes are rolling back in her head. The cyanosis around her lips has deepened to a frightening shade of purple. Her hand, the one holding the photograph of her son, goes limp, the picture falling onto the blanket. The race was over. The unseen enemy had won. Her body had fallen silent. The world narrows to the space around the cot. The sounds of the ward, the groans, the distant artillery, the major's indignant sputtering, fade into a dull roar in Hayes's ears. All he sees is Clara's face, the life draining from it like color from a photograph. All he hears is the frantic ticking of a clock that exists only in his mind. He has seconds, not minutes. He starts chest compressions, a desperate, rhythmic pumping, trying to force air in and out of her useless lungs, but he knows it's a futile gesture. Her airway is open, but the bellows, her muscles, are broken. There is only one option left. It's a brutal, high-risk procedure he has read about, but never performed, especially not in these conditions. A field tracheotomy. Cutting a hole directly into her windpipe to create a new airway he could control. Scalpel, he barks at Sergeant Miller, and a hemostat, and get me a length of rubber tubing from the catheter kit. Boil it if you have time. If not, give it to me anyway. Major Davies grabs his arm. Hayes, what do you think you're doing? You'll kill her. And for what? Hayes shakes him off, his eyes blazing with an intensity the major has never seen before. She's already dead if I do nothing. A nurse quickly swabs Clara's throat with iodine, staining the pale skin a garish orange. There is no time for proper anesthetic, only a token injection of Novocaine that Hayes knows will do little. Fisher, the translator, is white as a sheet, frozen in place. Fisher, tell her to be still, Hayes commands, knowing how absurd the instruction is. He cradles her head, tilting her neck back to expose the trachea. The cartilage rings are faintly visible beneath the skin. He feels for the small indentation below the Adam's apple, the cricothyroid membrane, a landmark he has only ever felt on cadavers. His hand, holding the gleaming silver scalpel, is rock steady. He takes a breath, holds it, and makes a swift, decisive vertical incision. Blood wells up instantly. He ignores it, using the hemostat to bluntly dissect the strap muscles, pushing them aside to expose the windpipe itself. The tent is utterly silent now, save for the patter of the rain on the canvas. Every eye is on Hayes and the bloody mess in his hands. He rotates the scalpel and makes a second horizontal cut, this one through the membrane into the trachea. There is a sudden, grotesque sucking sound as the vacuum in her chest is broken. A pink, frothy fluid, the sign of pulmonary edema, bubbles from the incision. It's a horrifying sight, but it means he's in. "Tube," he shouts. The sergeant slaps the sterile rubber tube into his palm. Hayes carefully inserts it into the opening, pushing it down past the paralyzed vocal cords and into her lungs. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happens. Then, Hayes leans down, puts his own mouth over the end of the rubber tube, and blows. Clara's chest rises. It's a shallow, artificial movement, but it's a breath. He pulls away, and the chest falls. He does it again, and again. He is breathing for her. The deep purple of her lips begins to recede, replaced by a pale blue, then a blotchy pink. Her eyes flutter open, no longer vacant, but filled with a new kind of terror, the terror of complete helplessness. She is alive. Hayes looks up at the corpsman. "You're going to do this now," he says, his voice ragged. Every 4 seconds, a steady puff of air, not too hard. Do you understand? The young man nods, his face a mask of awe and fear, and takes over the grim task of being Clara's lungs. Hayes steps back, his adrenaline starting to fade, replaced by a profound exhaustion. He looks at what he has done. He has saved her from the immediate crisis, but he has also tethered her to life by the thinnest of threads. She lies there, utterly still, unable to move, unable to speak, kept alive only by the breath of another man. Major Davies stares at the scene, his anger replaced by sheer, dumbfounded disbelief. "My God, Hayes, what have you gotten yourself into? She's a living vegetable. She can't be moved. She requires constant one-on-one care. She's an anchor. She'll drain this unit dry." Hayes has no answer. He turns to a basin of water to wash the blood from his hands. As he picks up the bar of soap, a strange sensation shoots up his arm, a tingling like a limb that has fallen asleep. He flexes his fingers, trying to shake it off. He tells himself it's just fatigue, the strain of the procedure. But then he looks down at his right hand, the hand that held the scalpel, and tries to make a fist. For one terrifying, eternal second, his fingers refuse to obey. They twitch, but they will not close. A wave of ice-cold fear washes over him, a fear more primal than anything he has ever felt on the battlefield. Is it his imagination, or has the unseen enemy, having claimed its victim, now chosen its next? The fingers on Hayes's right hand curl into a tight fist. The paralysis vanishes as quickly as it came. He flexes his hand again and again, the muscles responding perfectly. It was a phantom, a psychosomatic ghost born of bone-deep exhaustion and a terrifying flash of empathy. The momentary horror, however, leaves a permanent mark. For a split second, he had felt what Clara was feeling, the terrifying disconnect between mind and body. His clinical detachment is shattered, replaced by a fierce personal resolve. He would not let her die. The days that follow bleed into one another. The front line of Operation Cobra pushes east, and the flood of American casualties slows to a trickle. The 44th Evacuation Hospital transforms from a chaotic whirlwind of emergency surgery into something more stable, a place of recovery. This new rhythm allows for the impossible, the long-term care of one German POW. Clara Richter becomes a fixture in the ward, a silent, unmoving figure in Cot 7. Captain Hayes organizes a rotation among himself and a few dedicated corpsmen. They become her lungs, manually bagging her through the tracheotomy tube, a monotonous, life-sustaining rhythm, 24 hours a day. They become her arms and legs, turning her every 2 hours to prevent the bed sores that would surely kill her. They become her voice, holding up a board with letters of the alphabet so she can painstakingly blink out words. Through this slow, arduous process, they learn her story. She was not a soldier, but a conscripted telephone operator for the Luftwaffe, a Nachrichtenhelferin. She was a music student from Hamburg, whose city had been consumed by a firestorm. Her husband, a soldier, had been killed on the Eastern Front 2 years earlier. Her world had shrunk to a single point of light, her son, Lucas, who was living with her mother. Her greatest fear, she blinked out one night, was not dying, but that her son would grow up believing his mother had abandoned him. The American GIs in the surrounding cots, men recovering from their own grievous wounds, watched the strange drama unfold. Their initial resentment towards the German woman who commanded the captain's full attention slowly melts away. They see not an enemy, but a human being trapped in a waking nightmare. They hear the corpsman talking to her, telling her about the baseball scores from the Armed Forces radio service. They watch as Captain Hayes patiently helps her with the alphabet board. Her fight becomes their fight, a quiet, stubborn battle against oblivion waged in the middle of their ward. 3 weeks after the tracheotomy, Hayes is performing his daily neurological check. It has become a ritual of hope against hope. He runs a finger along the bottom of her foot, expecting the usual lack of response. He asks the question he has asked 100 times. "Clara, try to move your toes. Try to move just one." He watches her face, sees her brow furrow with immense concentration. He looks down at her foot. Nothing. He is about to sigh and mark "no change" in his chart when he sees it. A flicker, a tiny, almost imperceptible downward twitch of her left big toe. He stares, not daring to breathe. "Do it again," he says, his voice barely a whisper. She strains, and again the toe twitches, a minuscule but definitive movement. It is the most beautiful thing he has ever seen. The autoimmune assault has peaked. The long, slow process of remyelination, of the nerves healing themselves, has begun. It is a turning point, a declaration from her body that it was not ready to surrender. The recovery is a lesson in patience. The twitch in her toe becomes a deliberate wiggle over the course of a week. A week after that, she can flex her ankle. Each new movement is a victory celebrated by the entire ward. The day she can bend her knee, a cheer goes up from the men in the nearby tots. The paralysis recedes in the reverse order it arrived, flowing back down her body, releasing its grip finger by finger. Soon she can move her hands, then her arms. She begins to take breaths on her own, small sips of air around the tube. The day comes when Hayes determines her lungs are strong enough. He removes the tracheotomy tube, a simple procedure that feels as momentous as the surgery itself. He covers the small hole in her throat with a simple bandage. Her first attempt at speaking is a harsh, rasping croak. He gives her a cup of water, and she tries again. Her voice is a fragile whisper, but the words are clear, and they are not in German. She looks at him, her blue eyes shining with tears, and says, in heavily accented English, "Thank you." A month later, a new order comes. Clara Richter, now able to sit up in her cot and feed herself, is stable enough to be transferred to a permanent POW hospital in England. Her long-term prognosis is good, but it will be months, perhaps years, before she fully recovers. Her future is uncertain. The war still rages. But she is alive. As the ambulance prepares to take her away, she presses the worn photograph of her son into Hayes's hand. "You keep," she whispers, "to remember." He watches the truck drive away, splashing through the mud until it disappears from view. He stands there for a long time, the cool autumn air on his face, looking down at the smiling face of a little boy he will never meet. In the heart of the most destructive conflict in human history, amidst the politics of hatred and the machinery of death, Captain Dan Hayes had chosen to fight a different kind of war. It was a war fought not with a rifle, but with a scalpel, not for a piece of ground, but for a single fragile breath. And it was a victory that would define the man he would become long after the guns of Europe had fallen silent.